all know the Rinnegan is probably the strongest doujutsu in the entire series, and this eye has so many different abilities. Abilities that people tend to discuss, well, which one is the most powerful one, and let me answer this question for you. It's the Preta Path. Most people just come and say it's the Diva Path, but it's actually not. Because, well, do you remember which path do characters in the War Arc up until the very end of the series still use and is still relevant? Yeah, it's the Preta Path. Now, sure, they still use a lot of Chibaku Tensei, which is a Diva Path ability, up until the end of the series. Madara uses Chibaku Tensei, and Sasuke uses Chibaku Tensei to imprison all the tail beasts. But they also still use the Preta Path all day long. It's one of the most important abilities, and I'm going to describe why that's the case. The Preta Path has probably the simplest ability out of every single path of pain, but being simple doesn't mean it's weak. No, Preta Path can absorb ninjutsu and chakra at will without any limits. The databook actually states Preta Path is a bottomless pit that can suck as much chakra as it possibly can. Now, absorbing chakra and ninjutsu isn't something completely new when we got introduced to the Preta Path. We saw Kisame Samehada, we also saw Yoroi in the Chunin exams doing something similar to that, but the degree to which you can use the Preta Path, just simply negate attacks and also get chakra for yourself, is absolutely insane. We see Pain first using this thing against Jiraiya when he completely denies Jiraiya his jutsus. He absorbs the massive Rasengan, he absorbs the oil fire wind style combination jutsu Jiraiya uses with the toads, and then moving on to the Pain arc, he used that against Naruto many times to absorb the Rasen Shuriken. Now, of course, Naruto has some counters for that, and one of those times he uses a clone transformed into a Rasen Shuriken so that the Preta Path only absorbs the clone transformation. Naruto managed to attack Pain from behind, and the other time Naruto also makes Preta Path absorb Sage Mode energy, which is something not very good because, well, if you can't control Sage energy, you're gonna turn into stone, and that's exactly what happens. That's how Naruto defeats the Preta Path. Very clever. He uses the Preta Path's own abilities to defeat it, which is very interesting. But just think about this for a second. In the War Arc, when Madara arrives, he is almost untouchable because he has the Preta Path available to him. We also saw Nagato fighting without his paths, just his actual body, using all paths at once, not using them through a corpse, and it's an amazing experience for him because, well, if you are attacked by a ninjutsu attack, like Naruto's Rasengan when he had Naruto on his grasp, you can simply absorb the Rasengan. Nobody cares, man. You're just going to completely negate that and keep on extracting Naruto's soul. You can absorb powerful things such as a Madarasu, particle style. Madara absorbs particle style, a Kage Tota. And the other very interesting ability that I mentioned a little bit before is that you can absorb chakra with it and retain it to yourself. We see primarily Nagato doing that in the fight against Killer Bee when Killer Bee lariats him in the middle of the face, and he simply tanks the attack and uses the Preta Path in order to suck Bee's chakra into himself, regenerating his body and gaining his former appearance, no longer being that old man. Sasuke also does that against Naruto in their final confrontation when Naruto is regaining his chakra. The QB is trying to give him enough chakra for him to use a final jutsu, and Sasuke simply sucks that chakra with the Preta Path, absorbing the chakra for him, which allows him to use his final Chidori. And you know what's the craziest thing about this jutsu? It's that it's implied that it doesn't really spend any of your chakra. You can just use it. Or maybe it spends chakra, but the chakra you regain by absorbing the ninjutsu kind of counters it out, so you don't really have a loss in chakra when you use it. Which means this jutsu is insane. It's a defensive ability that's infinite and almost unbeatable. Makes you wonder why Obito in the War Arc never really used Preta Path when he had the Rinnegan. And while this problem usually stems from Kishimoto not really wanting to make the fights too cluttered with a billion different jutsus, because that Obito had 16 Churikis, the Rinnegan, and the Mangekyo Sharingan, so if he had every single Rinnegan ability available to him, that would be a lot. That's why they come up with the excuse, oh, it spends too much chakra, therefore Obito doesn't want to use those abilities. He's already spending too much with the Jinchurikis he's maintaining with the Rinnegan and controlling them and all that. But the thing is, he eventually loses the Jinchurikis and he no longer needs to maintain his Rinnegan control over them, so he's not spending the chakra anymore. And also, well, you can regain chakra if you use the Preta Path. For instance, when Naruto finally breaks Obito's mask and we get the big reveal, he was in the Kamui dimension, so he technically couldn't Kamui away from that, but he still had other alternatives to counter Naruto's Rasengan at that moment. For example, he could have used the Preta Path and absorbed it just like Nagato did when he was about to extract Naruto's soul. It was the exact same thing. Naruto aimed a Rasengan at him and Nagato didn't even have to move his hands. The Preta Path aura around him absorbed the Rasengan, which is absolutely insane. Now, maybe you can say Obito didn't really have the ability to do so because he wasn't that experienced with the Rinnegan, but it's one of the base Rinnegan abilities. Sasuke got the Rinnegan, and in the same day, he was already using that ability, and Obito had the Rinnegan for longer than a day. It wasn't much longer than that because the War Arc lasted for 2 days, but still, it was longer than a day. And then we get one of the craziest uses of this Preta Path ability. Remember when Madara got revived by Rinne Tensei and everyone was like, oh, okay, that could be good because we can actually kill the guy now. He's no longer regenerating ad eternum because of Edo Tensei. And then Sasuke nailed him with an Amaterasu and everyone thought, okay, he's done. You can't really counter Amaterasu if you just take that. Madara didn't have the Rinnegan anymore, so he couldn't even absorb it. And no, actually, Madara can absorb ninjutsu without his Rinnegan. So it's implied that for Rinnegan users that have the Rinnegan awakened at some point of their lives, they retain the ability to use the Preta Path even if they lose the Rinnegan. That is one of the craziest things about this jutsu. It seems to be the only Rinnegan ability that you don't require Rinnegan eyes on you to use it. You just require to have awakened them. And I would imagine this would only work for people that actually awaken the Rinnegan, so it would only apply to 2 people really, Madara and Sasuke. So maybe now that Sasuke actually lost his Rinnegan in Boruto, he can maybe use the Preta Path in Boruto still? I don't know, maybe. But if you want to have one ability of the Rinnegan to be able to use that without a Rinnegan, that's going to be the Preta Path because it's the most versatile one. You can use it in practically any situation that you're gonna face in battle or even not in battle. I mean, absorbing chakra is just such a very powerful tool. You can drain other people's chakra, you can break barriers just by sucking them into your hands. The one thing is uncertain. We actually see the Rinnegan interacting with the Susanoo when Nagato was fighting against B and Naruto extracting Naruto's soul, and then Itachi comes with his Susanoo and just breaks Nagato's arms and saves Naruto and B. That's interesting because Nagato was able to absorb Naruto's Rasengan just fine with his aura of the Preta Path, but the Susanoo just carved through it and he couldn't do anything about it. Now, you may say that he wasn't able to absorb the Susanoo because Itachi caught him off guard, which is true because Itachi blinded his summons so that he couldn't see through the Rinnegan link, but he had absolutely no chance of absorbing that. Still, maybe it's because he just didn't see it coming. But then there's another occasion in the same fight when Itachi lands a hit with a Totsuka blade on Nagato, and Nagato does not absorb it. Now, some people say that it's because Kabuto was using Nagato, so he didn't know exactly what to do, but he clearly did. He used Nagato's powers perfectly. He was about to kill Naruto and B in 2 seconds when Kabuto got serious fighting through Nagato. He even used the Preta Path, so he definitely knew how to use that. So it appears that the Susanoo, or at least the Totsuka blade, are immune to this jutsu. They cannot be absorbed. And that's an interesting question. If Nagato touched a Susanoo and used the Preta Path, would it be absorbed? We don't know, actually. Totsuka blade seems to be impossible to be absorbed because if Nagato Nagato could absorb the Totsuka blade, he would have done that. Kabuto would have done it, and then when Kabuto lost his grasp over Nagato, his body would have reacted automatically and absorbed it if he could. But I think the Susanoo is actually immune to it. There's another very interesting relationship between the Susanoo and the Preta Path. When Madara is fighting against the 5 Kage and they go for that final combo where Onoki uses particle style, Mei uses water dragon, Gaara uses his sand fuse with a water dragon, and the Raikage uses his lightning fuse with a water dragon to catch Madara for good, and then Madara has to use a perfect Susanoo. At first, when Onoki uses his particle style, that massive particle style cube, he destroys like the 25 Susanoos that they were fighting against, and he also tags Madara, destroying half of his body with it. And Madara thinks, oh, I couldn't absorb it properly because I was using my Susanoo, and that prevented me from doing so. So it appears that the Susanoo, for some reason, nerfs your capability of using the Preta Path, which is pretty interesting. Maybe the other way around works the same. Maybe you can't absorb a Susanoo just like you can't use the Preta Path while using a Susanoo. Why that is? Well, probably for balancing reasons. If you could use a Susanoo and absorb things at the same time, then everything would be broken. The same thing applies to using Kamui and using the Preta Path at the same time. That's probably why Obito never did it, because he probably can't use his Rinnegan abilities at the same time as his Kamui, except for maybe controlling the other Jinchurikis, because he's doing that all the time. That seems to be kind of a passive ability anyway. And there are other questions about how this jutsu works. For instance, if you lace your sword in lightning style, for example, and pierce through a person with the capability of using the Preta Path, can you absorb the lightning style before the sword reaches you with the aura, or can you only absorb it after the sword is already piercing your skin? Because that's obviously possible, but then we don't know exactly how powerful the aura is. We know it was able to stop Naruto's Rasengan used through one of those weird KCM limbs, but that was entirely made out of chakra. Now, of course, the weakness of the Preta Path is actually physical things, like taijutsu is a problem for the Preta Path. We saw Pain's Preta Path being pressed by Kiba and his mom, which isn't very impressive, but still, having the Preta Path as a fighter like Madara or Sasuke is such a humongous advantage. So much so that when Sasuke is fighting against Naruto, he kind of forgets Sasuke has the Preta Path available to him because he never uses it up until the very final stretch of the fight. I mean, it would have been very useful to use that jutsu when Naruto was throwing Bijudamas and Rasen Shurikens at you, wouldn't it, Sasuke? Now, I understand the Preta Path most definitely cannot absorb truth-seeking orbs, for instance, because that jutsu is something beyond ninjutsu itself. It's a KK Mora. Every single Nation transformation, I understand, rules don't really apply to truth-seeking orbs, but Naruto barely used them. He only used them to block Sasuke's attacks for a couple of times in that fight, and then Naruto was using ninjutsu. Sure, it was laced with sage energy most of the time, but yeah, we saw Pain absorbing a lot of sage energy in ninjutsu, such as the Rasen Shurikens and all that, and it took a lot for the Preta Path to become stone, so Sasuke could have handled a lot of it, I think. And Sasuke still had a very good chakra control. He had some experience with Sage Mode using the curse mark, so he could have probably handled it better anyway. Madara was able to shrug Sage Mode off as though it was nothing. He absorbed it using the Preta Path from Hashirama, and then he said, oh, this is Sage Mode? It's gonna be too easy to control. What a flex. And that's another very interesting usage of Sage Mode. If you cannot enter Sage Mode on your own volition, if you don't have the training or the capabilities, you can simply suck it out of somebody else who can. It's just Madara sucking it out of Hashirama. Pretty interesting ability. Overall, this is definitely the most versatile and probably the strongest power of the Rinnegan. It's not as flashy as Chibaku Tensei or Shinra Tensei even, but it is definitely something you would want to have if you could. Watch this other video right here for more Rinnegan related content. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already, and like this video to help me out. It really helps. Thank you so much. And also, thank you so much for watching.